What's up, Unleashed Humans? On this episode, I had the amazing pleasure to interview Jennifer Fugo, who is helping hundreds to thousands of people eliminate poor skin and poor digestion. Not only is she one of the most intelligent guests I've had, but she truly understands the human body better than most medical doctors, as she treats each and every one of her clients as an individual with specific needs. She covers how she takes a person from sickness to wellness by first understanding each person's history on an extremely detailed level and by ordering specific tests to precisely determine what is causing a person's gut dysfunction, leading to skin conditions like eczema, psoriasis, and rosacea. Now, if you didn't know, skin issues are some of the hardest conditions to mitigate because most people think that it is either caused by an external irritant in our environment or from food allergies. Now, these both can lead to chronic skin issues and gut dysfunction, but you will learn from Jennifer that it isn't that simple and that fixing your skin and gut is much deeper than what you've been told. Now, it was an absolute treat to have Jennifer on the show as I learned some things myself, and I'm sure you will benefit greatly from listening to this episode, even if you don't deal with recurrent skin issues or gut dysfunction. Jennifer is an amazing resource to have, and I am so thankful to call her a colleague and a friend. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Unleashed Human podcast with your host, Dr. TJ Woodham. Now, today's guest is a clinical nutritionist empowering women who've been failed by conventional medicine to beat chronic skin issues and unending digestion challenges. Because she's overcome a long history of gut issues and eczema, she has empathy and insight to help her clients discover missing pieces and create doable integrative plans. That's why she launched Skin Interrupt, to interrupt the failed conversation, about chronic skin problems with helpful alternatives that you aren't being told about. She has a master's degree in human nutrition from the University of Bridgeport and is a certified nutrition specialist. Her work has been featured on Dr. Oz, Reuters, Yahoo, CNN, and many podcasts and summits. She is an Amazon best-selling author and the host of the Natural Skin Show. Today, I am so excited and actually very privileged to have Jennifer Fugo on the show. Thank you so much for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, the coolest thing about her being on this show today is that she's my first guest that can actually talk about eczema. And for many of you, you know that I've had like a really bad history with eczema and almost one of the worst cases that many doctors that I had actually seen, they were telling me like this over and over again, like they've never seen anything like it. And so it's really nice to have someone else to kind of talk about the same thing. So Jennifer, you and I have a pretty similar story, you know, both having eczema and digestive issues. Do you want to kind of dive into your battle with eczema and the gut problems you had?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the gut problems definitely came first. I had them as far back as I can remember being in like high school. And I thought having bathroom problems was normal. It's not.
Yeah.
And I thought that like basically having to run to the bathroom with diarrhea. Sorry, guys. I'm like literally just going to like talk about poop. Like it is what it is. I do it all day. And really, I think we should like get more used to talking about our poop and being comfortable with our poop because it is a barometer of what's going on inside our body. So anyway, I had this chronic problem where like I'd eat something and be like sprinting to the bathroom. And it was really bad. I had developed these circular rashes on my arms and my legs. I became incredibly fatigued to the point where I was sleeping 9 to 11 hours. And even then my husband had to like shake me to get up out of bed to go to work because I couldn't wake up. I felt drugged. I had headaches every single day. So I was taking Tylenol for years. And I would get sick all the time. So my digestive problems were more than just that. It was a lot of things, but the fatigue is actually what drove me to the doctors. And eventually I found a nutritionist that believed me that it was more than just, I was exercising. That's what I was told by one doctor. I was exercising too much. Another doctor told me to just take some B vitamins and I'll be fine. And she looked at my history and said, you know, your diet looks like you eat a lot of gluten. Do you know what
Yeah.
gluten is? And being Italian, I'm like, no, what's that? I had no idea, like basically everything I ate had gluten in it. And that's where my journey began of learning about food sensitivities. I had to take out gluten, dairy, and eggs, and the cruciferous family and the cashew family. So I was well versed in that. I got a lot better over the years, but then I went to a very stressful master's program, which you mentioned in my bio. Thank you for reading that.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And the problem was, as you probably can attest, like going to through a program like that is incredibly stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And your body acts in all sorts of interesting ways when it's under an incredible amount of stress. And maybe some of your listeners can relate to that, whether maybe it's not school even. It could be family stress. It could be money issues. It could be like your kids driving you crazy. Your job is awful. And that stress manifests in different ways. And for me, it showed up and triggered eczema on my hands. So I had a specific type of eczema called dyshidrotic eczema. And what's interesting is that people who have eczema on their hands have an increased likelihood of actually having a SNP in this protein called filaggrin that helps the skin barrier be nice, sealed, and tight. So you may have talked about leaky gut, and we can certainly go there, but there's also something called leaky skin. And when filaggrin isn't produced appropriately, you end up with leaky skin. So I literally felt like I was in hell. I don't know how else to put it, but for 3 years, think about it. You go to shake somebody's hand, right? And you do look. You kind of look when you go to shake somebody's hand. Well, what happens when you look at their hand and it's red, it's swollen, there's cracks, it's oozing, there's like all these pustules all over it. Do you really want to shake? I mean, to be fair, like, do you want to shake that person's hand? And so I'd have people who would do a double take and be like, oh, yeah, it was so great to see you, like trying to fake their way out of having to shake my hand. And I understood on one hand, literally on one hand, I understood. And on the other, it hurt. And I had to stop teaching cooking classes because who on earth wants to eat food made with hands that are all cracked and broken? I mean, granted, I would wear gloves, and I had to. At that point, I literally had to wear these blue disposable gloves I would buy from Home Depot for most of the day because I couldn't even get my hands dirty to wash them. And it wasn't even soap. I couldn't put them under water because the water burned so badly.
Oh my gosh.
So I had all these awful experiences of feeling like, was I being punished? Did I do something wrong in a previous life? Did somebody put the maloika on me? Like, what happened? And eventually, after a dermatologist told me to just put Vaseline on my hands, I was like, we're all broken. Why would I do that? My husband was like, you're going through this program. What if you came to you as a client and this was a complaint? Like, what would you do?
Interesting.
And I didn't know. And that was where my journey really began on all of this, of unraveling the many pieces, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that surround eczema. And I can happily report, as you all can see, I have no eczema anymore. I am 100% in remission. So
that's amazing. Yeah, I had the same issues with my hands too. I had like 2 or 3 different types of eczema, but I also had the pustules on my fingers. They would always break out. I'm like, what the heck? Like, one day I thought it was gone and then it came back. You'd see like this little one coming from the underneath the surface.
Yep.
And then even my fingernails would get like the little divots in there. Yep.
Mine actually finally have fully grown out. It took a good year for my nails to grow out because nails and toenails grow at a different rate. They're much slower than skin and other parts of the body. And I finally, of course, it was like my middle finger was the one that was really messed up.
Of course.
And so it's finally grown out and finally a normal nail again. So.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's hilarious. Just the middle finger. It's like, yeah, right back at you, buddy.
Exactly.
Well, so Jennifer, question is, right? So many people, they think that skin rashes, they're like from an external stimulus or stress. Like that's what people immediately think. But you and I both know it's coming from something on the inside. Based off your experience, what can you say about the things that were causing you to have these flare-ups?
Well, I would say that for me, stress was definitely a factor here. I do think that there probably was some trauma, and we can talk a little bit about that. I won't say I'm the most educated on that, but I have been schooled and realized now that trauma in the past does play an important role in how disease manifests in one's body. But that said, I mean, part of it was that nutrition wasn't getting into my system. I wasn't eating well because, I mean, I was stressed. I was like eating microwavable food. It was gluten-free, but, you know, it's not the healthiest food.
Right.
So I wasn't sleeping well. I had blood sugar issues that popped up. So I was just really not in my best state at that time. And so there's a number of reasons why that happened to me. That said, what people don't realize is that skin rashes can result due to about 15 different underlying causes or the root cause approach. So you've got 15 different reasons, and that can include things like thyroid. So having low thyroid function can be a trigger. Having limited or low liver detox capacity, and not like the detox that's so popularly discussed.
Right.
Like we have legitimate detoxification systems in our liver that require certain ingredients in order to support things moving down a particular pathway. So like glycine, glutathione, etc. And so when you deplete those nutrients or you're just overloading the system for any number of reasons, your liver can't keep up. It can happen because of just general stress, obviously. It can be exposure to environmental allergens, food allergens, or sensitivities. Although I don't actually believe that food sensitivities are a root cause. I actually think they're a symptom of something else because your gates of your gut have to open in order for you to end up with food sensitivities.
Right.
But again, there's a lot of different factors, and not everyone, like I have a client now who, when she came to me, she had tried removing sugar, salicylates, gluten, eggs, dairy, nightshades, and a few other food groups with literally no avail. She'd had eczema for many, many, many years everywhere. And her face was so bad, like her mouth would crack when she'd smile or laugh. So, you know, I said to her, I don't think it's food. And she's like, really? I was like, I don't think it's food. None of that has worked. And I believe you that you've been diligent in it because you're you're at this point where you're kind of desperate and you're going to do it because you think it's going to be the next thing. I was like, I think there's something else going on here. And sure enough, there was. She's got some serious gut issues. And what I found is that about 95% of my very difficult cases, there's typically some involvement with their thyroid. There is almost always gut infections or dysbiosis going on that, again, is creating inflammation throughout the GI tract and is also overwhelming their liver and reducing mitochondrial function because they're not actually pulling in the nutrients they need to thrive. And usually they're just like depleted in certain things like vitamin A and vitamin D and other nutrients that are really necessary to rebuild healthy skin. So you have to think about the skin rash, whatever it is, even if it's like seborrhea dermatitis, you've got like dandruff, maybe it's on your head or your eyebrows, or in like if you're a man, if it's in your mustache, or you've got stuff elsewhere, or even psoriasis, which is a tad bit different because it is an autoimmune disease. So you need to think about it from an autoimmune perspective, whereas eczema and some of these other conditions aren't necessarily autoimmune. There's like some interesting overlap, but they're not quite. But you have to look at those as symptoms, not as fixating on it as, well, I have eczema. I have this thing on my skin, and that's what I need to look at. You have to say, all right, what else is going on? Right. And do tests. You and I agree on that. Yep. Testing is important. And look for what buckets need to be filled here. What's the priority? And where do we need to begin? What's practical? You know, you don't want to do everything at once. You're going to make somebody crazy. So, yeah, it's really connected to your gut too. There's like some interesting connections between the microbiome in your gut and your skin. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. Like you and I were talking about it, it's more on the individual than anything. And I'm a big proponent about testing, testing, testing. And that actually leads me to my next question. What kind do you do, like you did lab testings with most of your clients and that kind of thing? Like which ones do you typically go after?
Well, so as far as conventional labs, so I will say this, there's value in doing both conventional and functional, because some people become so fed up with their doctor that they're like, oh, I don't need those. What's the point? Right. They actually can be helpful. You're looking at your body from different perspectives, so it's all helpful. So I'll usually recommend that they'll go back to their doctor and request some fairly typical labs as far as like what you can get at Genova, or not, excuse me, that's a functional lab, Quest or LabCorp or whatever their doctor's office will do, or the hospital or whatever. And so I always ask for like a CBC panel, a fasted CMP, so we can look at both the kidney values and the liver values. Sometimes the person's also chronically dehydrated and it'll show up on that panel as well, which is helpful to know because your body needs a lot of water. But then we're looking at things like, so say somebody's like, if you're really itchy all the time, like if maybe there's hives that present or the skin is like puffy and it's itchy, then maybe doing something like a plasma histamine will be helpful. It's not the best marker, but it does kind of give you a sense if you've got like really high histamine levels without being exposed to anything. And then looking at, I always like to ask for vitamin B12, folate, vitamin D. Vitamin A is really important for your skin, your eyes, and your thyroid. So that goes hand in hand. That's like a really important one, serum vitamin A. And then typically if I suspect there may be some thyroid involvement, I always ask for a full thyroid panel, but sometimes doctors don't want to run it. They only want to run the TSH. I get what, I got to work with what I get. But a full thyroid panel's TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, and thyroid antibodies. And then I also like to look at red blood cell magnesium. So red blood cell is also known as erythrocyte magnesium, in case you're paying attention and listening. And it's not the same as serum magnesium, which will show up on that CMP panel, the comprehensive metabolic profile. And the reason is that what's hanging out in the blood is not really what's available for your cells to use. So we want to know how much magnesium is actually inside of the red blood cell. And that'll give us a sense of how much does a cell have in order to do any number of cellular processes, but especially magnesium is important to activate the body's ATP. And if you're like, what is ATP? It's basically your body's natural energy currency. Beneath the adrenals, it's the most basic energy building block, and you need magnesium biochemically in order to activate it. So magnesium is good for calming you down, but it's also important to help bring the energy level up. And so we need to know that, because if your cells don't have enough energy to turn over healthfully, that can be an issue. And then of course the red blood cell zinc as well, because zinc is important for healing. I'm trying to think. I always love to ask for homocysteine. Don't always get that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, Jennifer, you can ask me to order the labs. You could literally ask me, and I can order all the labs. So just want you to know that.
Okay, that's good to know. I will be in touch about that. Yeah, as a clinical nutritionist, I'm not allowed to order those in the state that I live in, which is Pennsylvania. But, fortunately, I'm lucky. A lot of my clients' doctors are willing to do things. They just don't know what. They're at their wits' end. And then I'll say, look, okay, so we get this one picture. I want you to think about your health puzzle as almost like a cube. I think sometimes we try to think of it as just like this flat puzzle, but it's not a flat puzzle. It's a cube. And so that means you need to turn the box, like, you get an Amazon box. You got to turn that box and look at it from different angles. And so a conventional lab will give you one side or one view of that box, but then you've got to spin it and look at other angles that make sense based off of your health history, your infectious history. Like, I want to know, did you have mono? Did you have some crazy virus? Did you have a stomach bug? Did you have food poisoning in your past? Because that means your gut got blushed. And we need to know when these issues happen. Were you on antibiotics for a lot of your young life or whatever? What's your history with poop? Have you been constipated for most of your life, or are you more diarrhea? Like me, that was my history. So we want to know all those things. And from there, we can then say, well, what kind of lab test, functionally speaking, would make sense? Would a stool panel make sense to look for pathogens? Should we do an organic acid panel, which is a urine test? Should we do hormone testing? What would make the most sense based on a particular client's budget, of course, and what we think is wrong? Because I don't necessarily think people need every test. I think sometimes that can be overkill. But providing people with options that then give them answers is, I don't know, the day that I got answers back as to why I had been sick for so long after being dismissed was like this hallelujah moment. And even though it wasn't the fix, at least I'm like, all right, I know where I am on the map. And now I can start building a plan toward where I want to go. And that's what those functional labs in conjunction with the conventional data and your symptoms and all sorts of things can help provide.
That's amazing. Well, a lot of people, mostly practitioners, healthcare providers, they don't look at it the way you're looking at stuff. Like they don't get into the nitty gritty, and you're totally right. They order these standard tests, they look at it like, normal. But they don't realize that if something's off on one panel and you look at the other panel, it's like, well, actually these have some correlation with each other, and you need to kind of look at it a different way. People, I think they forget about that, I have
no idea. My dad is a doctor and a surgeon. So my former life was in Western medicine, and I worked in his office, and I was his right hand with patients. And so I know both sides. I know what it's like to be a patient. I know what it's like to work in a conventional medical office, and I know what it's like to do my own clinical practice and integrative nutrition. So I get it. But I think that from his perspective, there's been this real lack of creativity. There's this fear of getting sued. And then also too, they just don't have the drive anymore, because if they even do something that say is what we do, if it's outside of the standard of care, they can get sued for that, even if it would be functionally appropriate. So there's just so much danger. I mean, my dad, and just as an aside, my dad, who takes insurance and Medicare and all sorts of things, they look at how many labs he requests, and he gets dinged every time he starts asking for labs. So you have to realize there's a lot more that goes on. I'm not justifying. There's a lot of really bad, lazy doctors out there that anger me to no end with their horrible comments, their lack of care, and their lack of empathy. Don't even get me started. But there is a problem within conventional medicine. And that's why I think I know what it's like for somebody listening to this going, yeah, but it's expensive. Well, that's true. One could look at going outside of conventional medicine as expensive. You could. But I also think about how many years of enjoyment that I've lost as a result of being sick, about how many things that I can't, and I'm probably never going to get to do in my lifetime, because I spent almost 20 years having serious digestive problems that were never resolved and blown off as normal. And it's okay. I've come to terms with that, but that's what's driven me to make it my mission to say, okay, well, isn't a quality life what's most important? Because the people that sit in my dad's office that are 70, 80, 90 years old, they tell me the same all the time, these aren't the golden years. They lied to us. You're in the golden years. And so what happens if when you're in the actual golden years of your life and you kind of don't see the value in making it the best it possibly could be because it's expensive? I don't know. To me, getting my health back is priceless. And I just had to figure it out. And to be fair, my husband lost his job, was laid off. So we lost 2/3 of our income in the middle of me being sick. We couldn't afford, we were basically below welfare, the amount of money that we made. And I had to figure it out. So I was just determined. And I think that's one of the things that I always tell to people, whatever your circumstance is, determine what you can do, be willing to make changes, and take baby steps and find a way. There's always a way. If you're really dedicated to figuring out how to support your health, whether it comes to skin problems or gut problems or whatever, you will find a way. You just got to be more determined than the mountain that you may perceive in front of you.
I think that's totally amazing because, and you know as well as anyone, that people are more willing to pay for their health later in their lives than to pay for it right now. So people could literally get a DNA test. They could get a stool sample. They could get their blood test. They could get a whole bunch of stuff now to kind of make their life revolve around that, you know? So like they know their body inside and out at the age of 20 rather than knowing it at the age of 60 with disease and decay. Mm-hmm. And at that time, they're going to spend thousands of dollars trying to get their health back when they could have had health way earlier in their life. And yes, they don't get it.
And it's easier to maintain as well. That's the other problem is that people go, well, when I get sick, I'll just like deal with that then. Well, if your thyroid, if say you start having thyroid problems, which 1 in 8 women as of right now has thyroid problems, and that's what's diagnosed. Don't even get me started on probably the rate of those who are undiagnosed with thyroid problems. But if your thyroid passes a certain point of destruction, there ain't no coming back from that. You're going to be on medication for the rest of your life. You may not be able to ever get rid of certain symptoms. You know, this is how it is with some conditions, like your window of improvement does lessen the longer and longer things get let go. I mean, sure, there are certainly miracles. I don't want to put the lid on somebody's hope, but I think that the lesson for people who are healthy is you should respect and appreciate that and take care of it because you only have one body. That's it. And once certain things go wrong, it's not always possible to fix them and just like be back to how you were at 20 years old.
It's super true, honestly. And people, they totally forget that. And, you know, being a chiropractor, we see that people with their spines all the time. It's like, man, if you came in here like 15 years earlier, your spine wouldn't be in such degeneration and we could have actually done something. I mean, granted, we do still help people even at like the age of like 50 and 60, but at that time, man, their discs, their nerves are just so inflamed that it's like, there's only so much we can do. So back to eczema. So eczema, psoriasis, skin issues, a lot of times, you know, like we were talking about, they have an autoimmune type relationship. Psoriasis, definitely. Now you're Italian, right? You had a lot of Italian foods. And so there's this idea that, you know, tomatoes are lectins and then like all of the breads and everything with gluten. What are your thoughts on like lectins and gluten with the autoimmune conditions and eczema? Should people like 100% avoid this stuff? Like if they're trying to get rid of eczema, or are there other foods that you should totally suggest staying away from?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't suggest people run out and eat McDonald's and soda every day. I mean, I think it's kind of, in a sense, somewhat common sense of what you should be eating and shouldn't. And I want to be very cautious in this conversation too, because one thing that I have regret about, because I take responsibility in that I played a role in the orthorexia that we have facilitated in making people so afraid of food, like in obsessing, like gluten is the devil and dairy is this and meat is that and it's going to give you cancer and this and I have clients that email me and are afraid to buy a box of tea because they don't know what's in it, and they read on somebody's big website that the tea boxes are all filled with pesticides and they're going to die because they're going to drink the tea. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be concerned about pesticides or GMOs or lectins or any number of things. But I also think to a certain degree, we have fueled a very unhealthy fear of eating and a concept of what it means to feed our bodies. And so what I have found with clients is that the more you restrict their food, the more they it actually perpetuates the state of food fear that they can't get away from, or becomes incredibly difficult when you're done working with them. So I would rather not put somebody on an elimination diet unless it's absolutely necessary. And that would have to be proved through, they can pinpoint, I had eggs and I had to run to the bathroom like 10 minutes later. Okay, right there. Yeah, eggs are probably not going to work for you. I would say the one thing I ask clients typically to take out is gluten. And not because I think gluten is the devil. There are people that can eat gluten just fine. There's people all over the world that can have gluten and they're fine. But not all of us can. I can't. And some people have autoimmune diseases. If you especially have an autoimmune disease, I do believe that it is important to take that out. And it's probably something you're going to have to break up with for good. But don't worry. It doesn't mean that your life is going to suck and be awful. There's plenty of alternatives. I mean, I certainly don't feel like I'm missing out on anything at this point. But gluten also increases gut permeability. It's the only food protein that has been clinically shown to increase gut permeability or leaky gut. And when you're not well, you do not want partially undigested food proteins, bacterial or fungal parts entering your body, triggering your immune system. So that's a big piece to this. But because that causes inflammation, essentially. So we want to stop the inflammatory process. In the case of an autoimmune disease, we want to stop the immune system from being ramped up and mistakenly thinking that it's got an intruder when it doesn't. Because those things shouldn't be in the body in the first place. So I would say for me, it's gluten. As far as lectins are concerned, if you start taking out all lectin containing foods, your diet is not like, you can't have strawberries.
Yeah.
I mean, I sat in on a really interesting lecture a number of years ago with Chris Kresser, of all people. And he's like, I'm here to debunk the lectin theory. And I know, and was it Paleo FX, where everyone was hilarious. Like paleo, and they're all about like no lectins. And he's like, realistically, it's not all about beans and grains. It's like, if you truly want to be lectin free, there's a lot of very healthy foods. And what good does that necessarily do us? I think one of the problems with fixating on food, I understand that it's easy to encourage or inspire somebody to like take action, and you can do this in your kitchen, which I think is great. But if you take those foods out, you're not actually resolving, if say you have candida overgrowth. If you take those foods out, you're not resolving leaky gut. You're just removing the trigger or this one little this symptom. You're not actually resolving the underlying problem. And that's where, as I worked with people more and more, I realized we've put the cart in front of the horse in like obsessing over food, because we don't actually know why we've become so sensitive to these food chemicals and food proteins and all sorts of things. Something had to happen in order first before that could even occur. And if we're really going to be honest about a root cause approach, we have to dig deeper and say, well, why did you develop these sensitivities? And that's why I believe, in looking at, do you have high secretory IgA? So is inflammation high in your gut? Are we having, bacteria? Like sometimes some clients, they don't have an outright infection in their GI tract, but they actually have way too much E. coli, like not Jack in the Box, like food poisoning E. coli, but just regular run-of-the-mill E. coli that should be there, but they just got way too much, and that can cause problems. So, or it could be an infection. And if we don't know what those things are, then just fixating on food, I mean, I don't know. That just sort of seems like you're sucking the joy out of a person's life. You're making them afraid of food. And frankly, you're not solving the problem. So why do they need to be on this elimination diet that doesn't really make a lot of people feel better? And I'll give you one last point in regards to eczema. There are some diets around eczema as an example. And every once in a while, I'll get really angry emails from people on my list, because I'm Italian, so I'll post a recipe with tomatoes in it. And inevitably it's this person writing me back, really mad. I really love the work that you do, but I am so horrified that you would recommend this recipe that has tomatoes in it, because tomatoes are a nightshade, and they trigger my eczema and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, because I know where this is going. I said, oh, okay. So what have you been doing? It sounds like you've taken out a lot of foods. Oh yes, I'm on this specific diet. And I don't want to say what it is just because I don't like to badmouth colleagues, but this is the one problem that I have with a lot of these diets. I was like, oh, okay. Have you been able to reintroduce any of those foods now that you're better? No, unfortunately, that's the biggest problem. Every time I eat them, I get a flare. I'm like, right. That's the problem, because you didn't resolve what was underneath causing you to be sensitive to all these foods. So now you're stuck on this ever decreasing iceberg that does not help you. And the more I've talked to other dietitians, functional or integrative dietitians, not like, you know, the people that are like funded by McDonald's and whatnot, like really into health, even they have said to me, they share this legitimate concern that we have overstressed that food is the problem, and that we're not looking at these underlying dysbioses in the gut. And I'll give you one other reason why this is important. Your gut flora directly communicate with the flora that live on your skin. Directly communicate through short chain fatty acids is one way. I mean, there's certainly other ways, but butyrate, which is one of the short chain fatty acids that your healthy gut flora produce, and it helps to acidify the gut and create a pH environment that is unfriendly or hostile to bacteria and such that you don't want living there. When there's a healthy amount of butyrate, it communicates with these other guys that are living on your skin, which is amazing in and of itself. And they say, oh, hey, everything's good. But when you have this dysbiotic state where there's not enough butyrate because there's a dysbiotic state or there's an infection or any number of things, because there's not enough butyrate, now there's not enough of that signal. And you start to notice this disconnect of how the skin will look. So that's one way in which, that's why I say, I'm like, yeah, you can take the food out, but you gotta look deeper.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And that actually raises an interesting question. So I had small intestinal bacterial overgrowth when I had my eczema. Like, it was super bad. And I had gas, bloating, right? Like everything that comes with it. And it was pretty rough because, like, you know, all the bacteria were feeding off all the sugars I was eating, creating a lot of secondary fermentation. And so, you know, I eliminated certain things and, you know, I got better. But my question is, when you have someone with SIBO, or if you had someone with candida overgrowth, you know, given that, you know, they're an individual, you need to look at their history and everything. Like, as a broad spectrum overview, what would you do with someone with SIBO or candida? What kind of things do you typically do?
Well, I would say with SIBO and candida, they're obviously different beasts.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely different. Yes.
They're very different. I would say and it also depends on the severity of the SIBO. I would say, like, if I discover that the client is really bad SIBO, I'm going to flat out tell them, because I don't like being given the runaround. So I tell my clients just kind of like the truth.
Yeah.
I'm just like, look, I'm not the right practitioner for you, but let me refer you to somebody, because I don't deal with very complex SIBO cases. If it's like low level, they've got some symptoms, maybe like hydrogen is slightly elevated or methane or both are slightly elevated, that's not really usually that hard of a situation to treat with botanicals and such. But if it's like out of control, then it's really time to go to somebody that specifically deals with that, because, as you know, SIBO can be a real challenge to get rid of.
Oh yeah.
It can be a long road, and it can be very frustrating. And there's issues with doing the elemental diet, and, you know, you have to know how to handle that. And that is not something, see, again, it's all about, like, that's what I believe. Like, I'm like, I want to go to a practitioner that's like going to tell me what they do and what they know and what they don't. And I can tell you right now, like, for me, SIBO is not my wheelhouse. But with candida, so number one, I'll tell you this. I don't really restrict people's diet on candida. I'll try and like say, okay, if most of my clients aren't eating like a ton of junk to begin with, and like they're not eating a lot of processed foods anyway. And so I'm not going to have them like take out all of their starchy carbs and everything. I actually have great results just doing like the appropriate antifungals, using some S. boulardii if they can tolerate it. and just making sure that we're cleaning things out, supporting their liver, and you got to drink enough water. If you're doing a gut protocol, guys, you got to drink enough water because you got to flush things out. You kill it, you got to flush it out. Yeah. But I find that like candida is usually pretty straightforward, but like the diet piece doesn't work. So, and I've talked with multiple people that are like experts in the candida diet, and they all like begrudgingly kind of admitted, they're like, yeah, you can't get rid of candida with the anti-candida diet.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. And I was like, well, then why are we telling people to do that? Like they're miserable. Yeah. And I've been on an anti-candida diet and it's horrible. You can't go out. You like hate everything that you eat because it doesn't have any flavor and you're just miserable. That's not like, I want people to be happy. So typically I'll focus on the protocol and that I want them to follow the protocol. And here's my guidelines. Like, okay, so we're not going to do any cookies. We're not going to do like, you're not going to have any soda, but like my clients typically aren't eating this anyway. And usually if they are eating a lot of like sugars initially, we'll just try to start removing that before we even go down that road. But one of the big pieces to dealing with any kind of gut issue is you have to keep pooping. So if you are chronically constipated, you have to get the bowels moving. Otherwise, like everything that is being rebalanced is going to stay stuck inside your colon, and it's going to be a real miserable situation. So one of the things that I was trained in, like I feel really lucky. I had a mentor for about a year, and the one thing she impressed upon me over and over again was make sure to get the bowels moving more normally before you do a protocol, because the last thing you want for them is to just be stopped up and like they're taking all these antifungals or antimicrobials and they're just not pooping. That's not good.
Gotcha.
So you need to figure out do they need some magnesium citrate? Do they need more water? I mean, I hate to say like the simple stuff, but sometimes people don't drink enough water. I hate to say it, but like seriously, the 8 glass thing is just like a good rule of thumb. 8 cups a day, and you should be like pretty good. 8 to 10 cups for like a normal person. If you're athletic, that's a different story. Right. But just drink enough water. Are you getting enough fiber that's appropriate for you? And then sometimes you may need some things to help move things along, like ginger can be helpful. And I'm trying to think if there's some other supplements out there that can kind of like help with motility when it's compromised, and which sometimes can be a challenge with SIBO. There's an interesting connection too. SIBO, about 50% of patients who have thyroid disease, like Hashimoto's, for example, tend to have SIBO. And then what's also interesting, is rosacea. There's a very interesting connection between SIBO and rosacea. And even ocular rosacea, which tends, at least from what I have read, I've actually interviewed so many people for my new podcast, The Natural Skin Show. But one of the physicians that I spoke with, he's a gastroenterologist, and I found him because I found this amazing study, and I said, I want to interview this guy. And so it turns out that ocular rosacea, which tends to show up first before the facial symptoms, but not always, when they actually use rifaximin, they were able to resolve the rosacea or the ocular rosacea, which is crazy because nobody tends to look at it from that perspective. Yeah. So there's all these gut connections to skin issues that a lot of people don't look at, but are critically important.
Very interesting. That's super cool. And, going back to the thyroid, they actually been talking about people that were actually diagnosed with thyroid issues. Actually, it was a gut dysfunction. And it was just this new research that's been coming out, and it's very, very interesting. And so they've been misdiagnosing a lot of people. So I thought that was awesome.
There's just the world of the microbiome in general and gut. And it makes me excited. I'm kind of a nerd.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it.
But like, there's so many cool things that happen when the body starts to struggle. And so like one simple thing that everybody can do, and I highly recommend you do at home, is figure out if you have enough stomach acid, because that can cause a whole slew of problems. So having low stomach acid can set you up for SIBO. It can also cause your nutrients to not be available to be absorbed by your gut. can also mean that you're ending up with these partially undigested proteins that are hanging around in the gut that also move further down in the GI tract. And those proteins, really, they should be broken down and absorbed. But if they're not fully broken down, they go further downstream and they start feeding gut bacteria that you don't want to be feeding. So you're not actually eating and absorbing the nutrition those gut bugs are, and then they overgrow and cause a problem. So just figuring out if you have enough stomach acid is important. And I'll say this, if you have GERD or heartburn, there's a pretty good chance that you may actually have low stomach acid, because the symptoms for high and low are actually the same. Now, you could have no symptoms. You could have no heartburn symptoms and think like, I don't have an issue with that. But there's a lot of clients that I work with that don't have any heartburn symptoms, and they have low stomach acid. So it's a really easy test that you can do at home. It's called the bicarb test, or the low stomach acid test. And I actually have an article on my website that I'm happy to share all about that. But you're basically just mixing bicarbonate or baking soda with some water and drinking it on an empty stomach and seeing if and when and how big of burps you get. And so if you're getting very few burps, little tiny burps or no burps, you don't have enough stomach acid. And so that's a sign right there that your digestive system needs some sort of support. And that's not digestive enzymes, guys. There's a triad of things that are required for your digestive system to work properly. It's stomach acid, bile, and digestive enzymes. They do not all do the same thing. They do not cover each other's bases. So you have to know whether you need them. And, if you don't have enough stomach acid, that definitely means that you're going to need to take something in order to break down your proteins.
I'm so happy you brought that up, because people take Tums like it's going out of style. And they don't get it. Like they are literally destroying their acid, and they don't understand that we need acid to break down all the foods. And just like you said, the reason why most people get SIBO is because they have a lack of acid, and that allows bacteria to come through and then go all the way down into the intestines. And people, they don't understand that, but they see all of these commercials with Larry the Cable Guy, Pepsid AC or whatever the heck he's doing, right? And like they take Pepto-Bismol, and like even my father the other day, I was talking to him on the phone, and he's been having some stomach issues lately. It's completely random. He's like, yeah, I've been taking Pepsid AC. I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh, like, and it just like, it drives me crazy. I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? Like, people don't know, right?
No, they don't. And you can do this test. That's a good point that you bring up too, just because I'm thinking somebody may be taking Pepsid AC or the purple pill or any number of things. And they're like, oh, but I'm already taking something. Like, is it okay for me to do this bicarb test? And it is. It completely is okay, because you're not doing it around mealtime. And it'll give you a sense, like if your stomach acid is already low, why are you taking medication to reduce it even further? And on top of it, if you read the booklet inside the medication, it will tell you flat out that you're really not supposed to take it for longer than something like 6 weeks. It's not meant, those medications were never meant for long-term consumption, because they cause a whole host of problems, as we just mentioned. Plus, they reduce your body's availability to B12, because B12 and other actual nutrients are bound to proteins. And unless you have enough stomach acid to separate those nutrients from the proteins and then break the proteins down, they pass through the digestive system. They don't get absorbed. You can't absorb chunks of food. You can only absorb the smallest pieces individually. So if you can't break them down, if you're swallowing big gulps of food too, if you're a fast eater, slow down. You only have teeth in your mouth. There is no teeth anywhere else in the digestive system. Your body can't handle big bites of food. So just realize that while there's simple things, slowing down, chewing your food, and determining if you have enough stomach acid, and then paying attention to your poop. Look in the toilet and see what it looks like. Look at how many times a day you're going to the bathroom, and then take a roll call of all the symptoms that you have, not just digestive symptoms or skin symptoms. Like, do you have brain fog? Can you not remember people's names? Do you have a metallic taste in your mouth? Do you get toenail fungus? Like, I know these are like all weird things, but it's not normal. So if you notice that there are things that are off, write them down. Don't censor yourself, because they're your body's way of communicating with you that something's wrong. And when we blow them off, as has become fairly normal in this day and age, we're basically telling our bodies that you don't matter and it's not important. And then it only becomes important until the mountain of symptoms is so bad that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't leave my house because I can't get off the couch. My skin's really messed up and I'm embarrassed to go out, and it's messed up to the point where I can't put makeup on it. So I just can't function. Or every time I eat something, I have to, and anytime I go out, I got to know where the bathrooms are, because I don't know what's going to happen. And I know we're laughing, but like, these are really serious things. Like, I mean, I really thought that's why I call skin rashes like total hell, because I really thought that like I couldn't work out anymore. I couldn't even wash my hair, because even the medical gloves I got from my dad, no matter how many times I was like, well, I'll put rubber bands really tight around the wrist, it's still, the water would go in. So it compromises your sense of self. It compromises your freedom. It makes you feel like a freak and a weirdo, and people look at you differently. And sometimes they think you're gross. If it's skin issues, they can see it. It's like wearing a scarlet letter, whereas other symptoms like thyroid symptoms are invisible. So people don't understand. They think you're lazy because you're so tired on the couch.
Yeah.
So just understand that like, these are some simple things you can do at home.
Yeah.
And it's worthwhile.
I'm glad you brought that up too. And we're actually going to get into the self-esteem and confidence thing, because when I was going through my doctorate training, we were going through orthopedic testing, clinical rounds and everything. And I remember having to take my shirt off in class with like 50 of my classmates. And I don't know if you've seen, Jennifer, but like on my actual page, I have eczema from like my head all the way down onto my torso, all the way down into my legs. And it's like super, super bad. And I remember having to take my shirt off in front of everybody, and nobody had seen how bad it got, because it really got really raw. And I remember one day I had to actually ask one of my clinical doctors to allow me to sit out from any kind of orthopedic test that would make me take my shirt off, because I was super embarrassed. Because actually one of the days I did have to take my shirt off, and I had it under my armpits, I had it all over my back, my front, and it was probably one of the most embarrassing things ever. And I remember it was during the summer. I had to wear long sleeve clothing and like long pants, because I was covering all of it. It was like 100 degrees out in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember people still asking me, TJ, why are you wearing long sleeve shirts? It's like a million degrees outside. And I just brushed off. I'm like, I don't know, because I feel like it. I didn't tell anybody what was going on really, even though people could see I was super sick. I lost like 20 pounds. I was super sickly. And I still remember going to one of my friend's weddings, and his mother came up to me and like asked if I was doing okay. And I remember behind my back, she had asked my buddy who was getting married, is TJ like really sick? Does he have like cancer or something? That's how bad it got. And so I still remember like having to hide from friends, family. I remember during a Christmas vacation, my friends would always come home, and I remember they all wanted to see me. And I hid from them for 2 weeks because I didn't want any of them, like my best friends in the world. And like I screened all their phone calls, their texts, because I was so embarrassed to show my face. Mm-hmm. So to that, can you kind of tell speak about like your experiences with that, and like how people have to overcome that fear and that emotional turmoil to like really help themselves? Because with your mind being in a place where like you want to hide from everybody and just like be down on yourself, like that really contributes to the amount of stress you're putting on your body, and it won't actually allow you to get better. So can you talk about that?
That is true. And that's a great point that you raise. And actually I mentioned earlier about the trauma piece to this. And it's interesting with skin rash issues, any type of condition, like you'll notice like how you were talking about, look at all that trauma that you endured. Yeah. Seriously, you don't to like somebody that doesn't have skin rashes, I can promise you don't really understand how bad it is, because there's a level of shame that goes like you screened the calls. You didn't want to see your friends, like your closest friends. You didn't want to take your shirt off in front of a room of people training to be a doctor who I guess shouldn't be judging you, but
but like I'm supposed to be healthy as a doctor.
Right. Exactly. And for me, like I was this nutritionist and becoming this nutritionist, and I was like, I don't want anyone to see my hands. Like I couldn't do any more public stuff. I like, why are you wearing blue gloves? Like,
right. That's very tough.
It was like ridiculous. I would go to, I used to be in a, do a pet, like a pet, what do you call it? One of these like places with a pet shelter grooming? And no, just a pet shelter. I would volunteer with them, and I would walk in with blue gloves on. They're like, are you really not afraid that they have fleas? And I'm like, no.
No.
I didn't want to explain to them why my hands were so messed up, and I couldn't then wash my hands. So I didn't want to touch the cats because I was cleaning out cat cages, and I didn't want to get any of the like Dawn dish soap on my hands, because that stuff, let me tell you, is not gentle. It is not gentle, despite what they say. But like I couldn't touch anything. I had to stop going to the gym. I mean, like, I just didn't want to be seen anymore. It makes you feel terribly embarrassed and ashamed and dirty almost. And people look at you like either you're infected with something, and like, ew, I don't, like, you have cooties, or you're a leper or something. Or you know, somebody, I read on a message board, it's interesting because that's sort of what inspired me to start Skinterrupt and the Natural Skin Show. I joined these Facebook groups because I was just so frustrated. I wanted to see, like, maybe people had other information or something, because it's not easy to find on these skin issues. They can be very hard to deal with if they're chronic cases, and it's not well consolidated. So I thought, well, I'll join a Facebook group. Maybe they'll know. And what I discovered was that, like, some people, like, they were told by family members that they're paying for the sins of their lives and being punished by God. Oh yeah. That like people don't want to touch them because they don't know if they're dirty or what. One woman had shared that her mother-in-law would constantly just tell her that she doesn't know how to use moisturizer correctly. Yeah, that's why her skin's all messed up, because she doesn't know how to use moisturizer correctly. Like, come on. And so she would constantly buy her all these different moisturizers, trying to like teach her how to use moisturizer. I mean, like, that's so sad. Like, it's embarrassing. It's demeaning. You know, I had a client that she was a surgical device rep. So think about that. She's got to go into ORs where it's supposed to be a sterile environment, and help doctors learn how to use surgical material or surgical devices on their cases. Except that her face was completely taken over by these rashes. Her eyes it was all swollen around her eyes. And she's like, I'm going to lose my job because I'm supposed to look sterile and clean, and I'm walking into a sterile environment and I don't look that way. I've worked with attorneys. I've worked with certainly moms that are just like fed up and frustrated. They don't even want to go to PTA meetings. They don't want to, like, they're afraid to go pick up their kids because the other parents are going to see them. I mean, it really sucks your life away. And the one danger that can happen sometimes is that, this is always the thing, like, be very careful about how much you wrap your identity around having a skin issue, because it can be really hard sometimes, like, spending so much time in the shame and not liking yourself and hating the way that you look, that if something happens and those rashes go away, those feelings don't just magically evaporate, because sometimes we identify with them so much that, and I'm not a therapist, but I have talked with a lot of health professionals about this, that there can be a danger in over identifying with, like, I am my eczema. Like, you're not your eczema. You're not your rosacea. Something's going on. We need to figure out what it is and look for root causes. But you have to learn to love yourself for who you are, for the things that, you know, the qualities of, like, maybe you're an incredibly kind and thoughtful person. Maybe you're an amazing knitter. You know, you make these amazing gifts, or maybe you're a really great jokester. Like, I don't think I tell very good jokes, but some people are really funny. You have to learn to love who you are despite those rashes, or else they will plague you. I mean, I feel so bad. Like, I don't know that I could run one of those Facebook groups, because it's usually about once a week where I'll see somebody put a message up where they're like saying they're going to potentially kill themselves. Like,
It's
this is
rough,
a very
yeah. I've seen
serious,
them.
yeah, it's again, when you don't have or have never had skin rashes, you don't understand how bad it makes someone feel. And you don't understand that hell. So telling them, oh, you just need to find the right product, you just need to find the right moisturizer, you just need to like wash your hands differently, like that's not actually helpful at all.
Everyone's an expert these days on skin, aren't they?
Yes. And that's one reason why I just thought, like, okay, so number one, we have this horrible conversation about skin in general. Like, we're either super fixated on our exterior appearance, so it's like anti-aging or beauty, and that's about it. So basically, you're excluded from that conversation if you can't get with that camp. And frankly, I wasn't caring about making my skin look youthful when my hands were all messed up. Like, I just wanted the itching and the pain to go away. And so I want to interrupt that conversation. I also want to interrupt the conversation that dermatologists are having right now with their patients. Like, I'll be honest with you, it pisses me off to no end when they're like, sorry, I don't really know. You can either take the steroid or leave it. Like, I don't really know what else to tell you. Oh, I don't run labs. Go back to your PCP, you know, or the fact that there is like millions and millions, something like, I think the last stat I found was like $34 million from pharmaceutical companies is given to dermatologists.
Wow.
Like, or the fact, hold on, that eczema medications like Dupixent, which is the new big one, do you know how much it costs a year? $35,000 a year. And once you get better, you have to stay on that for the rest of your life. Humira, which is used off-label sometimes with some of these skin conditions, is $50,000 a year. So if these dermatologists are not getting any of these, like we talked about SIBO, right, being a potential root cause for rosacea, or SIBO could be a root cause for your eczema or your psoriasis or any number of things. But if those dermatologists are not getting that information because it's being controlled by pharmaceutical industries, then frankly, every patient that doesn't need those drugs, think about how much that's a pretty big harm to their bottom line.
Oh yeah.
So this is why I was like, first of all, we have the right to demand better in care. It is 2018, 2019, whatever. We should have better care for chronic skin conditions. Number two, we should be on the forefront of this research and actually implementing it. And number three, we should be looking at these other potential causes and helping people to piece together their puzzles rather than just saying, oh, try a steroid cream. Oh, do this. Right. Yes, a steroid cream can be helpful. I certainly used it as part of my healing journey, but you don't have a steroid cream deficiency. That's not why you have
I love that.
a rash. Yeah. So I want to provide people, you know, like, let's start this conversation. Let's interrupt this, what's going on, because it's not working for anybody. And let's actually look at some alternatives. What are the alternatives that are science-based, that are backed by research, that maybe could be the missing piece for somebody, or help them implement something that their doctor literally knows nothing about? And maybe in the process, we could get dermatology to be like, we need to get our together.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up. I love that, because man, it would get me so fired up when people talk about corticosteroids and like taking this and taking that. And it's like, that will never help you. It's a Band-Aid. You have to understand that. And it just, honestly, the most lazy thing ever. When I went to see the dermatologist for the first time, they just told me, oh, yep, atopic dermatitis, which literally means inflammation of the skin. Like, they didn't even say it was eczema. They just said it was atopic dermatitis. Here you go, here's a corticosteroid. Get the hell out of my office. Like, unbelievable. And I'm like, I guess that's it.
And the other piece to that is that there are side effects to the steroid that people don't realize. Just so y'all know, I'm not trying to scare anybody, because again, I did use a steroid cream sparingly as I was trying to go through my journey, which took about a year. But just so you know, even if you're slathering your skin with it, it does absorb in, and it does impact your adrenal glands, number one, especially in kids and babies. which they do use topical steroids for treatments and skin rashes with them. So there is that impact. And number two, you can end up with basically your skin becomes addicted to the steroid, and it becomes near impossible to get off of it, because you're just putting the cap. It's the same with like biologic drugs. You put the cap on inflammation. Just because you stop using and you take the cap off doesn't mean the inflammation's not there anymore. Just because the symptoms went away doesn't mean it's not there. All of a sudden it comes back even worse. And if you end up with like the red skin syndrome after going off of topical steroids, well, and it's, topical steroids, it can take up to a year for the symptoms to go away. So
pretty rough. Well, so my last question as we kind of like wrap this up, what's your like 3 top advices for someone that has eczema? Like, you know, whether that's diet, if that's mindset, anything, like what are the top 3 things you would probably, you know, on the surface, obviously you would have to sit down with them and figure more about them, but what are the 3 things you would tell someone with eczema that kind of like help things out?
The first thing I would say is, do not put coconut oil on your skin. It's too antimicrobial and can cause an even greater disparity in the microbiome of the skin. The microbiome of the skin loves oil. It eats oil. It's a lipid loving. It's actually a lipidome. But that's not the right one. Like jojoba oil would be a better choice because it's closer to the natural sebum, human sebum.
Gotcha.
So no coconut oil. I know there's a coconut oil craze.
I like that. Yeah.
And number 2, you definitely need to eat enough protein. A lot of people are not eating enough protein. You need to get at a minimum, if you've got messed up skin, and frankly, I think this actually spans like Hashimoto's, thyroid issues, gut issues, autoimmune issues, but we're just kind of like talking about skin today. But I think a minimum of like at least 70 to 80 grams of protein a day. I think a lot of times you should be a bit higher than that, but that should be your minimum. And a lot of my clients are way under that. And they think that's even too much because they've been brainwashed by a lot of these documentaries thinking that like protein is really bad for us and we don't need that much, and just even cutting out the plant-based protein. And I'm like, no, you need more. And they start to actually feel a lot better when they begin to increase their protein intake.
Cool.
Number 3, I would say, I'm going to be a little cheeky here. I'm going to say, come and listen to the Natural Skin Show because you're probably going to learn a lot. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
And then lastly, number 4, this was like my real thing. Check your stomach acid. That's like a super easy thing you can do at home. You can do that with a family. You can have your kids check their stomach acid levels as well. That low stomach acid test, which I'm happy to give you guys the directions for, and you can put that link in your show notes maybe so people can download that and check that out. That is a super easy thing you can do. It's free. And then you'll know like more or less like how to gauge that and then like what the next steps are, because regardless of what you have going on, if you're not breaking your proteins down, it's going to cause a whole lot of problems further downstream. So that would be my suggestion.
Awesome. I love it. Now at the end of the show, I have 3 random questions that I always ask.
Okay.
So the first one is, if the world was ending today and you could have anything for your last meal, what would it be?
I would have, so I'd totally eat gluten.
Yeah, it's okay.
But the reason I would eat gluten is because it was the most amazing meal I ever had was in Bologna, Italy, many years ago. And it was homemade bolognese, tagliatelle alla bolognese. So it's basically fettuccine with homemade bolognese sauce over top. That was like, I would totally eat that again. That was
my mouth is watering right now.
I mean, because like at that point, I'm not going to care if like gluten's going to like, leaky gut.
Oh, it's the last day. Yeah.
It's the last day.
What's a little diarrhea? Totally. Yeah, I agree. So second question is, if you had one last week to live and you are in perfect health, you could travel anywhere in the world, where would it be?
I would go to Florence, Italy. I'm sorry, there's obviously a repetitive theme here.
That's totally cool.
But I love Florence.
Okay, cool. I love it. I still have never been to Italy, so I got to get over there. I know it's terrible. My heart is broken because I haven't been over there yet. So lastly, third question, if you had one piece of advice for anyone out there living to live a better life, what would it be?
I would say, goodness, to live a better life, I would tell you to hug the people in your lives that you know. I think it's great that people are so like good about eating a clean diet and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, we're not guaranteed tomorrow.
Right.
And you just don't know if somebody, I had a friend that was pregnant and her husband literally had an aneurysm and died like a month before their first and only child was born.
That's awful.
My dad had a patient. She was a great lady in her 70s, full of life. She was saw him, left to go take the bus home and tripped on the curb and hit her head on the bus step and died. So, I mean, I don't say this but it's just like, it makes you realize that the people around us may not be here tomorrow, and appreciate them, tell them that you love them, and don't wait. Don't be like a chicken and like, I don't want to tell anybody how I feel. Like, tell people how you feel. Right. Tell people you love them, even if you're not that type of person. I didn't used to be like telling my family, oh, Mom, I love you. Like, we got used to it. And I'm so grateful now that we are more honest and open about how we feel in our family toward one another, that we love each other. And we make a point for my nieces because it's a good example to set, but it also has made me more appreciative of my parents and more intentional, and it's improved our relationship. So that's what I would suggest.
I think that's a really, really good piece of advice, because I say that all the time. It's like hugging someone. I mean, that releases, like, just by hugging someone alone releases so many endorphins. And I think that's fantastic. So Jennifer, where can listeners go to get in contact with you and learn more about you?
Yeah, they can go to skinterrupt.com. You can also check out my other website, jenniferfugo.com, where I have information about my clinical practice. And then find me over on iTunes. Natural Skin Show is the podcast. I know you're going to be a guest. I'm so excited to have you on. Yeah. And it's just going to be awesome. Those are the 3 best spots. I'm also over on Instagram, so if you're curious about what I eat and what I'm doing, that's also a great spot to check in as well.
Awesome. Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for being on. I'm actually really excited to be on your podcast, and we'll speak very soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you got a lot out of it. If you haven't already, head over to www.theunleashedhuman.com/unleashed to get your free copy of my book to supercharge your life. Now that's it from me. Have an amazing day, Unleashed Humans, and we'll speak very, very soon.